Ever made a promise that seemed simple but turned out to be heavier than you imagined? This is the story of a young man who swore eternal love to his parents, but fate had other plans. What he didn't know was that some promises don't end with life. They echo, they bind, and they can turn love into an invisible prison. Today, you will hear a story that might change the way you see goodbyes. Lucas was a young man with a pure heart. As an only child, he grew up surrounded by the love and protection of his parents. From a young age, he would always tell them he would never leave. No matter what happens, I will always be with you. It was a phrase he repeated, never realizing how serious it would become. His parents laughed, hugged him, and felt proud of such devotion. After all, what family wouldn't want a love so unshakable? But time passed, and one day, the promise was put to the test. The accident was sudden, a sharp turn, a second of distraction, and then emptiness. Lucas left too soon. His parents, devastated by grief, couldn't accept reality. The house, once filled with laughter, was overtaken by a cruel silence. But then, the signs began. That same week, his mother woke up in the middle of the night to hear a whisper in the room. "Mom!" She jumped out of bed in despair, turned on the light, but the room was empty. His father, a skeptical man, also began to notice strange things. Photographs he swore had been put away reappeared on the table. The scent of Lucas's childhood cologne lingered in the air. And then, something impossible happened. One night, as he was closing his son's bedroom door, he felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. He turned and saw. There stood Lucas, not as a terrifying ghost, but as if he were still there, among them. Sad eyes, a smile trapped between pain and longing. Were his parents happy? In a way, yes. They felt that Lucas had never left. But then, something changed. The nights became heavy. The house, once warm, now carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Lucas's presence grew fainter, as if he was trying to say something, but couldn't. Until, on a silent night, his mother had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. She saw Lucas before her, trying to speak, but his mouth wouldn't move. His eyes screamed. Something was keeping him there. Then, a soft voice whispered in her ear. "He can't leave until you let him go." At that moment, she understood. Lucas was still there because they were holding on to him. Not physically, but emotionally. The promise of never leaving had become a chain, and letting him go would be the greatest proof of love they could give. The couple decided to act. That very night, they gathered all of Lucas's belongings, photos, letters, clothes. They sat before them and, with tears in their eyes, began to speak. "My son, we love you, but we understand that you need to move on. You will always be with us, but it's time for you to rest." In that instant, the cold disappeared. The weight in the air lifted, and for the first time since his passing, the house felt light. The mother looked toward the bedroom door, and for a brief moment, she saw the shadow of a smile before it vanished forever. Love is powerful. It connects, strengthens, and gives life meaning. But when we hold on too tightly, is it still love? Lucas never wanted to trap his parents in sorrow. He just didn't know how to leave. And how many other stories like this exist? How many people still feel the presence of someone because they never got to say goodbye? Perhaps true love is not holding on forever, but having the courage to let go. As a child, he learned that true love never fades. His parents were his safe haven, his guides, and his protectors. Amid the hardships of village life, he swore he would never leave them, that his love for them would surpass any limit. Strong words, filled with emotion and, unknowingly, with power. Promises are like seeds planted in time, and some bloom in unexpected ways. In Andean culture, stories tell that vows made from the heart can bind a soul beyond this life. But was he ready for the consequences of that? His grandmother always warned him, "Be careful with what you promise, boy. Words have more power than you think." But who listens to warnings when the heart speaks louder? He only laughed, believing that love was greater than any superstition. In his mind, nothing could separate him from his parents, not even death. It was a belief so deep that it seemed unshakable. Time passed, and his promise remained marked like an invisible seal, something he no longer even remembered. But fate has curious ways of collecting debts we make without realizing it. Life went on until the unexpected happened. The young man left too soon, leaving his parents in mourning, unable to accept his absence. But what if he had never truly left? Strange things began to happen in the house. Objects moved on their own. Whispers filled the silence of the night. It was as if he were still there. Between grief and longing, his parents started to wonder if their son had kept his promise in a much more literal way than they could have ever imagined. In that isolated village, stories were passed down from generation to generation, like whispers from the past that never faded. The elders always said that the line between the living and the dead was thinner there, almost non-existent. It was a place where words carried weight, where a simple vow could cross the veil of time and become reality. The villagers knew that some promises should never be made, but not everyone believed in such warnings. Unknowingly, the young man had spoken a sentence, and now his fate was intertwined with something far greater than he could ever imagine. At first, the signs were subtle. His parents heard footsteps when the house was empty, smelled a familiar scent with no explanation, and objects fell without any apparent reason. It could have just been the weight of longing playing tricks on their minds, right? But then, the manifestations became stronger. Some nights, his father swore he saw a shadow pass down the hallway. His mother felt the touch of an invisible hand on her shoulder. It was not a coincidence, nor was it imagination. That village had its own rules, and they were living one of its most feared stories firsthand. The neighbors began to notice it too. A dog howling at nothing, doors shutting on their own, a sudden chill in the air. An old man from the village whispered to the young man's mother, "Your son didn't leave. Ma'am, he's here." The woman shuddered because, deep down, she already knew. The love that bound them was too strong to be broken, but at the same time, it might have become a prison. And now, what do you do when the one thing you want most, to have your child close, might be the very thing keeping him from moving on? The young man's grandmother always had a wise gaze, one that saw beyond the obvious. Since he was a child, she had warned him about the danger of eternal promises. Nothing in this world lasts forever. Not even love can hold back those who need to leave, she would say, her voice firm yet affectionate. But how do you explain that to a young heart, overwhelmed by emotion? To him, her words were nothing more than old folks' tales, exaggerated stories meant to scare grandchildren. Little did he know that, in his own family, that warning had been put to the test long ago, and the outcome had been anything but happy. There was a legend in the family about an ancestor who, consumed by the pain of loss, swore never to abandon his deceased wife. He clung so tightly to her memory that, little by little, his life began to fade away. In the end, people said that he simply disappeared. His body was never found. The grandmother told this story to her grandson, trying to make him understand that love, when misunderstood, can be a chain instead of an embrace. But the young man laughed, believing that his love for his parents was different. It was pure, strong, unbreakable. And without realizing it, he was repeating the mistakes of the past. Now, the grandmother's warning had become a fulfilled prophecy. The love that was supposed to bring comfort was trapping the young man's soul between two worlds. His parents felt his presence, saw the signs, but time passed, and nothing changed. Their sadness did not fade, and neither did the spirit of their son. That promise, made so innocently, now carried a terrible weight. But if words of love had been enough to bind his spirit, perhaps they could also be the key to setting him free. At first, his parents tried to convince themselves that it was just grief speaking louder. It was normal to feel the presence of those who had passed, to dream of them, to hear their voice echoing in memories. But soon, it became impossible to ignore the signs. In the kitchen, silverware moved on its own. The old rocking chair in the living room creaked, even when no one was near. At night, the father heard light footsteps in the hallway, just like the son's when he used to come home late. The mother, on the other hand, felt a weight beside her in bed, as if someone still lay there, listening to her stories before falling asleep. Reality began to blend with the unexplainable. Photographs fell from the walls without reason, and objects that had belonged to the son appeared in strange places. One day, the father found one of the young man's old notebooks open on the table, on the page where he had written, "I will always be with you." That couldn't be a coincidence. The mother, increasingly convinced that their son had not found peace, felt her heart tighten. If he was there, why didn't he speak to them? If he still loved them so much, why didn't he show himself completely? Perhaps the problem wasn't his presence, but the barrier that separated them. What once seemed like a comfort began to turn into unease. Time passed, but the manifestations did not fade. On the contrary, they seemed to grow stronger. The love that bound them was still there, but something felt wrong. The son wasn't just visiting, he couldn't leave. The promise made long ago had become an invisible chain, keeping him trapped between the world of the living and the dead. But was there a way to undo this fate? The love between parents and children is a force that transcends any boundary. But in some stories, this connection can become an impossible knot to untie. In that young man's case, his vow was not just a symbolic promise. It was an anchor preventing him from leaving. His parents, unknowingly, also nurtured this bond. They called out to him in silence, longed for his presence, and refused to accept his absence. And so, without meaning to, they kept his spirit trapped between two worlds. After all, how can you let go of someone you still love so much? The manifestations became part of their routine, but instead of bringing comfort, they brought unease. If their son was there, why did his presence feel so distant? Why did his energy, once so vibrant, now seem exhausted? The mother, feeling a weight in her chest that she couldn't explain, began to understand. Perhaps the young man was not there by choice. Perhaps he was trapped because he still felt their call, like a ship anchored in place. He could not set sail because something was holding him back. Love can be the most powerful bond of all, but it can also be a prison. The father, hesitant, began to wonder if his son's promise was exacting too high a price. If he loved them so much, wasn't he trying to say something? Maybe, deep down, he wanted to leave but didn't know how. But how do you release someone who is no longer among the living? How do you free a spirit that vowed never to depart? The answers seemed unreachable, until a village priest brought a revelation that would change everything. Desperate for answers, the parents sought help from a well-known priest in the region. He was a man of few words, but his gaze carried the weight of someone who had witnessed many stories like theirs. As he listened to the parents' account, he remained silent for a long time, as if searching for something beyond what was said. Then, finally, he asked, "Did your son wear something special, something that symbolized this unbreakable bond?" Without hesitation, the mother took out the ring they had given the young man in his childhood. A simple object? Perhaps. But to the priest, that ring was much more than that. The old priest took the ring in his hands and closed his eyes, murmuring words in an ancient language. After a few minutes, he lifted his head and said with conviction, "This ring is the symbol of the promise. It is the chain that binds your son to this world." The parents exchanged bewildered glances. The piece of jewelry that represented love and unity was now an invisible shackle. The priest explained that, in Andean tradition, objects infused with deep emotion could become spiritual ties. The ring was more than just a gift. It was a silent pact that prevented the young man's soul from finding its path. The mother clutched the ring to her chest, feeling her heart tighten. How could they part with something so meaningful? But the answer lay precisely in that. To love is sometimes to know when to let go. The priest was clear. To free their son's spirit, they had to return the ring to the place where the promise had been made. Only then would the bond be undone. But would the parents have the courage to do it? The decision would not be easy, but time was running out. The next morning, the parents prepared for the difficult journey. The place where the promise had been made was atop a hill where the young man used to play as a child. Every step toward it felt as heavy as a ton. The mother gripped the ring tightly, as if a part of her son was still there. Father, always strong, now walked with a lost gaze, torn between love and the need for release. They knew there was no other choice, but that didn't make the moment any less painful. How do you say goodbye to someone you never wanted to lose? As they reached the top of the hill, the wind blew fiercely, as if nature itself understood what was about to happen. The mother knelt down, placing the ring on the cold earth, exactly where the son, years ago, had sworn eternal love. The father stepped forward and, with a trembling voice, murmured, "Son, we will never stop loving you. But now, it's time for you to go." The silence that followed was overwhelming. It was as if the entire world held its breath, waiting for a response. And then, something changed. The wind stopped for a brief moment. A ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the ring with an intense glow. The mother felt a gentle warmth in her hands, as if it were one last touch of farewell. The father closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he felt an inexplicable peace. It was as if, at that exact moment, the son had understood. Their love would still exist, but now, without chains. What would happen next? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Something inside them had changed forever. That night, something different filled the house. The silence no longer felt so heavy. The air no longer carried that inexplicable chill. For the first time in a long time, the parents felt that something had shifted. The mother, used to sensing her son's presence in every corner, realized that the subtle feeling of someone being there was gone. The father, who had always heard footsteps in the dead of night, slept peacefully for once. The young man had left, not because he was forgotten, but because he was finally set free. His love remained, but now without pain, without restraints. In the days that followed, small signs still appeared, but not in the same way. Now, they were no longer manifestations that brought unease, but sweet memories that warmed the heart. The father found an old note from his son with a simple, "I love you, Dad," and instead of sadness, he smiled. The mother heard a song he used to love, and for the first time, she hummed along without crying. The pain still existed, but it had now transformed into a gentle longing. Love had not disappeared. It had simply learned to exist in a different way. And so, the cycle was complete. The promise that had kept the young man between two worlds was broken, but not the love that bound them. The parents understood that sometimes the greatest proof of love is not holding on, but letting go. And the young man, wherever he was, could now follow his own path. After all, true love does not need chains to exist. It simply lives, eternal, in the hearts of those who never forget. What does this story teach us? That true love never dies. But is love really about possession? Is holding on, clinging, restraining, truly the best way to love? Or could it be that, in reality, the greatest act of love is learning to let go? Think about it. How many times do we hold on to something or someone out of fear of losing them? We believe that gripping tightly is the best way to show affection. But what if, deep down, true love is actually freedom? Those who leave never completely disappear. They live on in our memories, in the gestures we inherit, in the stories we tell about them. What binds us is not absence. It's the way we choose to deal with it. Now, stop and think. Is there something or someone you haven't been able to let go of? A loss you've never fully overcome? Or maybe a promise, a situation from the past that still holds you back? The young man in this story only found peace when his family decided to set him free. And maybe, in your life, there's something that also needs to be released so that you can move forward. Now, let me ask you, what would you do if you knew that by letting go of the past, you could make room for something new, something transformative? If this story made you reflect, leave a comment below. I want to know, do you believe that promises can bind a spirit? How do you deal with the longing for those who have left? Share your thoughts. I read every comment. And if you want to keep exploring deep topics like this, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for the next stories. Because some truths are only revealed to those willing to see them.